You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Hey listeners, it's Taylor Early, back again with another arc. This time, it's The Cult of Chef with Hannah Chouinard. Hannah is an alum of the Spring 2024 Fellowship Program here at HRN, and not only a hospitality worker, current informer, but also a food writer. When we were speaking just before we turned on the mics, I asked Hannah for a couple words for this intro to describe what she does. And she said she struggled because in hospitality, you tend to wear so many hats that it actually is pretty hard to find a label that really sticks. It feels like a perfect parallel for this amazing arc that Hannah is about to share with y'all. So, Hannah, hi, welcome to the pod.
Hello, Taylor.
During our time together in the fellowship, it was crazy, but we kind of danced around the fact that we both have had a number of years and really came up into our own consciousness in hospitality in our own ways. But we've never had a candid, real conversation about this. And I was elated to have you come back and pick up your old research from your master's work at NYU.
Yeah, I don't know. I was so excited to talk to you specifically about this because food service reform and like labor stuff in food service is what I work on and what I think about basically all the time, and a lot of what I talk about too. But yeah, it's so like infrequent that I get to hang out with someone who's also excited to talk and think about it.
Oh yeah, I love yelling about this. I can't wait to yell on the pod with you. So when we initially pitched this series to you, and when you pitched us back an idea, I knew it was up, you knew it was up, but our listeners didn't. So could you please, in maybe 2 or 3 words, could you maybe describe what you're going to be talking about across your 3-episode arc?
Yeah, totally. So the like big ideas that I'm hoping to cover are labor, representation, and reform.
Louder for the people in the back. Oh my gosh, yes. Let's really get into it. How did you actually land on these 3 words and this topic within hospitality as what you wanted to focus on for your arc?
For my master's thesis, I wrote about food service labor reform, and I had all of these really cool ideas in my head, and I was excited to write about them, but was kind of just like settling into a life outside of school and outside of the fellowship. So I didn't have a ton of opportunities to do that. And when you reached out about this series, I was really excited to kind of like get to utilize all of this research that I did for basically just a paper for my academic peers. Initially, I wanted to look into the ways that Heritage had talked about food service labor reform and like pull from all of these interviews that I was sure that they had had with these big voices in the labor reform movement. And looking through the catalog, they just didn't exist, which was really disappointing, but also like stood out to me as kind of a reflection of the larger food media world where most of what we talk about isn't actually the people who are doing the day-to-day labor of making the industry work. And it's rather the like, I don't know, you referred to them as the charismatic megafauna of the industry, which I'm just obsessed with.
That's so foolish.
We love to talk about things that are pretty and interesting in like a really obvious way, and we don't like to dig down into the things that are tougher to think about.
Ooh, yeah, that was perfectly articulated. Arc over.
Thank you all for listening.
No, truly. It was so interesting to realize that there have been 15 years of stories, and then through these conversations in our production meetings, catching up with Hannah on how the research is going, how you were kind of sifting through the yes chef of it all. I would say HRN has been a product of its time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think we are like moving into this era where media really has to like consider their place in the world. Choosing to be like objective and neutral when you're talking about things that are actively hurting people is not, you're not doing nothing. Every choice that you make, everything that you say is deciding to side yourself up with someone. Media, even food media, which people think of as vapid and like silly and kind of like hedonistic, they also have a place in that scheme of deciding who gets to express their power, like who gets to build power.
Truly. And I think to that point, moving away from the French chef on PBS to the Food Network with Mario Batali and Rachel Reyes, to the TikTokification of food media and moving away from long form into short form food content. There's negatives and positives. I would say the greatest positive that came out of short form social media content being the prevailing engagement we have with food media, at least in the late 2010s and the early 2020s, is the democratization of access, representation, and connection. Most of my food media community actually exists online. And because of the ability to be remote, because of the pandemic forcing us to think differently about how we do connect and why we connect and what community really feels like and is, I mean, community is such a buzzword. It's so sexy right now to be in community, but community is inconvenient. Like, we have to actually be honest with each other. There's accountability that's necessary in community. And I would say in hospitality, there's a lack of accountability because it's stripped of its nuance, it's stripped of its ability for people to slow down and see beyond a headline or see beyond a world's best list or see beyond Michelin. There's a significant lack of accountability that then is like the antithesis of how we actually hold each other up and are in community with people who we are in the trenches with day in and day out.
That feels like a really great segue into the story I wanted to use to start the series off, which I think really sits at the intersection of all the ideas I'm going to try to cover in the next 3 episodes. This past December, I was walking around Lower Manhattan when I got a text that a restaurant group I'd once worked for had received their first Michelin star. I went online and saw a video of the team accepting the award, and watching my old bosses on a stage holding a plaque marking them as one of the best restaurants in the world according to Michelin, I felt this confusing combination of pride and heartbreak. I still care a lot about some of these people, and I'm so happy my friends were recognized for their work, but to be honest, I have a hard time believing that what they're doing is what we should all be aiming for. This wasn't the worst restaurant I'd worked for, not by a long shot, but their behavior as colleagues and supervisors was nothing close to exemplary. I was yelled at multiple times on the floor in front of customers for things like not polishing a glass to the perfect sheen. My coworkers and I were often told that our clothing was inappropriate because our bodies were, quote, distracting to male customers. I'd seen colleagues on the brink of tears after being snapped at by a manager. It wasn't anything that dramatic, just sort of the low-impact bevy of poor behavior common in the industry. But, hey, they serve really good food, so it's all worth it, right? Right? Your everyday food service worker doesn't see it like that.
I would see runners and barbacks that I worked with where English wasn't their first language and how they were very much kept to working some of these lower paying positions for years and years and years with the same skill, sometimes more skill than some of my other coworkers, but never being afforded the opportunity to go to a bartender and say, hey, I'm going to shadow you, and have that be accepted. It was immediately crushed and shot down by management. Bigotry and racism and all of that was just very prevalent within the industry. And it wasn't just one particular place.
The owners decided they wanted to do a kind of rebrand of the restaurant. So they needed to close for minimum 2 weeks, and that the staff should apply for unemployment during that time, which would have meant we would have gotten at most $504 for 2 weeks of lost work, which is not a livable amount for anyone in the city. So me and some colleagues ended up writing a letter asking for proper compensation. After all that happened, I basically became the black sheep of the restaurant. Yeah, just in general, I felt like I was really being punished and forced out of the company. And my life was just so miserable. My anxiety was so high every day going into work.
Right now, I'm on sick leave. I had to use all my vacation pay that was built up. But my vacation pay isn't even reflective of what I actually make through tips. My vacation pay is based on minimum wage. So I'm still taking a pay cut. I don't even working in a corporate place. I'm not getting actually my paycheck as if I were at work, even though I'm recovering from a surgery. I'm getting like a small fraction of that because they don't pay me. The guest pays me.
As anyone in the industry can tell you, this kind of workplace abuse is common. People get screamed at. Sometimes things get thrown at you. Veterans will tell you to always keep track of tips and check your pay stubs because your employer will steal from you. Back-of-house workers are often paid minimum wage to work in grueling and dangerous conditions, while their front-of-house colleagues survive off of inconsistent and sometimes menial tips. Sexual harassment is rampant. Discrimination against employees based on their race, ethnicity, or nationality is the norm. On top of that, workers are rarely offered benefits like health insurance or PTO or even unpaid parental leave, things that are the bare minimum in other industries. Food service workers are exempted from most labor laws, and what few workplace protections do exist are almost never enforced. It's enough to drive anyone crazy, but that's life for almost 15 million people. I've personally spent around a dozen years in food service and worked at something like 15 restaurants. Every one of them has offered up some combination of the same issues: wage theft, sexual harassment, overbearing and explosive bosses, long hours without breaks, lack of benefits, the list could go on and on. Some of these jobs were truly unbearable, some were marginally better, but none were immune from the problematic norms that plague the industry. And yet, because these places served delicious food, or the atmosphere was great, or the chef was really charismatic, all of these restaurants received acclaim. Chefs and restaurant owners can get away with just about anything, as long as the package it's delivered in is alluring enough to make people look the other way. How did we get here?
Chef.
Representation in media and entertainment can be a powerful way to have your voice heard. But in the restaurant world, the only people who get to stand in the spotlight are chefs. The rest of us are left to thanklessly build the pedestal they stand upon. Over the next 3 episodes, I'll explore how chefs are positioned as the center of the industry and investigate the very real impact on the people who labor for and beside them. Can you list for me 5 chefs?
Chef.
Okay, well, Gordon Ramsay. Does Paul Hollywood count?
James Beard. Julia Child. Is it like Anthony Bourdain a chef?
Gordon Ramsay. Maddie Matheson. Don't actually really know who he is, but Dan Barber.
Famous Bobby Flay. Gordon Ramsay. Rachel Ray.
Mario Batali, Grant Achatz, Amin. Oh my god, Thomas Keller, I guess.
Samin Nosrat. Solo Whaley. And her husband. Maybe like Tom Colicchio? Is he a chef? Or just a guy?
Oh, there's the annoying guy with the gases and the smells. Grant Achatz.
Who's the Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives guy? Diners and Dives and... what's his name?
Guy Fieri.
Guy Fieri! Yeah. Thank you.
Taylor, I think this will be a breeze for you, but can you name 3 to 5 chefs off the top of your head?
I'm going to name Mario Batali, Maddie Matheson, Renee Redzepi, who is my favorite person to yell about. I'm going to name Alice Waters because we need to get some estrogen up in the list, and Dan Barber, another chef I am obsessed with yelling about.
Okay, no big surprise there. But even for people less food-focused than us, listing a couple of chefs is a pretty easy feat. Some notable names: Emeril Lagasse, Wolfgang Puck, Gordon Ramsay, Julia Child, James Beard, Jacques Pepin. Please stop me. People love to talk about how much they respect and admire Anthony Bourdain, or give their hot take on David Chang's attempt to take over the chili crisp market. You'd be hard-pressed to find someone who hasn't swooned over Jeremy Allen White on The Bear, even as he screams at his sous chef.
Fuck off my expo chef now!
There are countless articles written about chefs, their lives, their food, the origins of their deep and unmatched genius. Their images are emblazoned on the cover of trendy magazines. There's an entire TV network single-mindedly dedicated to the veneration of all things chef. Even this podcast network falls into the trope. Over the course of its 15-year history, Heritage Radio Network has produced 17 shows dedicated primarily or exclusively to covering the stories, thoughts, interests, and influence of chefs. Combined, that brings us to nearly 3,000 episodes interviewing, quote, many hundreds of chefs, according to the network's executive director. America can't get enough. Chefs are perceived as uniquely talented individuals and arguably the most important factor in the success of any restaurant. You can have a great wine list, a beautiful space, amazing employees who provide amazing service, but you can't be a world-renowned restaurant if the food isn't blowing people away. And in theory, that's all down to the chef. The era of the star chef is a pretty short one, but its emergence has changed the way we think about what restaurants have to offer and their place in our social scenes. Andrew Friedman, an HRN regular, is the closest thing to an expert on the topic.
My name is Andrew Friedman. I'm a Brooklyn-based writer and broadcaster, and I specialize in restaurant chefs and more generally in restaurants and kitchen culture.
Chefs weren't always idolized the way they are now. For a long time, restaurants were just places to get a meal when you were hungry. People didn't enter those spaces with the assumption that they were about to have their world changed by a plate of food. And chefs didn't have the celeb status they do today.
These were places of convenience more than anything else. There was really no interest in who was cooking the food. Those people were considered menial laborers. The big turning point in the West was the movement that's known as Nouvelle Cuisine. They weren't just cooking, classical French cuisine. They were certainly using classic techniques, but they were essentially starting to compose their own dishes.
Something started to change during the last half of the 20th century. A generation of Americans were traveling around Europe, experiencing food cultures that were dramatically different from the TV dinners they grew up with. Emphasis on locality and quality, along with the free spirit of the 60s and 70s, inspired people to drop out of law school and into the kitchen. These new chefs were using food as a vessel for self-expression.
Which sounds really quaint today, but that was really a brand new thing. That just did not happen before. And as chefs began to essay their own dishes, there was naturally an interest in who it was that was doing this. A lot of the presentations became striking or beautiful.
What Andrew doesn't mention here is that most of these people were, say it with me, white men with at least enough wealth for transatlantic travel. The influx of privileged and well-connected people into the industry brought with it a new level of notoriety and respect. Chefs were no longer serfs scooping slop in a dirty hovel. They were charismatic and creative and a little bit sexy. In just a few decades, chefs went from nobodies to certifiable celebrities.
People eventually started to say chefs are the new rock stars. There was an article once where David Boulay he looked like Eddie Murphy. He was wearing a red leather motorcycle, whatever you call it, suit with his helmet leaning against his motorcycle. He was the cover of the New York Times Magazine, and that was a chef. That was mind-blowing to people, and he was dating Bernadette Peters at the time. I mean, what's different between that and like a movie star?
We're living in the aftermath of that era now. New age food media has picked up the trail and introduced chefs into our homes through YouTube and Netflix. The Food Network is still kicking 35 years after its inception. National and regional publications like Eater, Grub Street, and Cherry Bomb highlight the vanguard of celebrity chefdom. Unlike most chefs featured in the 1960s and 70s, though, a lot of these chefs are not white guys. Samin Nosrat won a James Beard Award for her first cookbook and has her own Netflix series. In 2022, Gerald Sombright became the first Black person in the U.S. to run a Michelin-starred kitchen. Dirt Candy's Amanda Cohen has been written up in Forbes, the New York Times, and dozens of other publications. There's so many examples of women chefs, queer chefs, and chefs of color getting shouted out in newspapers or going viral in the last half-decade. All of that feels hopeful, in a way. Voices that have been largely ignored, despite contributing the most to global food cultures, are finally being recognized. Time to celebrate. Or maybe not.
As we are realizing as a collective community in food media and as human beings, Systems of oppression can be enabled and perpetuated by the people who are inherently being oppressed as well. So I'm calling everybody in. The girls, the gays, and the theys.
Yeah, if you just like slot different people into those positions, it's really tough to make any real change. Because usually those people are being like educated by shitty white dudes that came before them. And like they're learning all the same lessons as those guys did. That's how you make the industry work, right?
For listeners, those were some heavy scare quotes by Hannah.
My hands are so tired.
Oh, our little scare quote fingers are getting an exercise, honey.
But I think a lot of people, no matter what they look like, they have learned that being cruel to other people is the best way to make a living in food service.
Yes, and that cruelty is often masqueraded as like paying your dues and then getting what's yours. And I find it endlessly frustrating to engage with that ideology where hurt people hurt people. Okay, healing, please. Like, what are we going to actually do about that?
Putting different people in the spotlight doesn't change the systems at work here. Chefs being front and center in food media, whether they're rich white dudes or queer women of color from working class backgrounds, is still privileging the people in power. Chefs and owners, who are often the same people, still make all the rules governing the lives of the people who work for them. And if they've risen to prominence within a system that rewards bad behavior, chances are they've internalized a lot of those lessons, no matter who they are. Focusing on the people at the top comes at a real cost to everyone else who makes the restaurant run. It's rare that we get to hear the perspectives of people who are less privileged by these systems, like servers, line cooks, dishwashers, porters, and support staff who actually do the daily labor required to make and bring us our food. This blind spot has real impacts on those workers who have very little power to advocate on their own behalf. In the next episode, I'll dig into what life is like for the workers who spend their days toiling away for the chefs who get to sit in the spotlight. The Cult of Chef is written, produced, and edited by me, Hannah Chouinard. Our host is the one and only Taylor Early. Cover art for The Cult of Chef is designed by the incredible Michael Hampton. For info on Andrew Friedman's book on the evolution of the celebrity chef, and links to the studies cited here, check out our show notes.